It began with a sound so small, most people would have ignored it. A single vibration cutting through the dark, faint, harmless, almost forgettable. But in that stillness, something sacred cracked. By the time the sun rose, trust would be broken, a promise would lie in pieces, and a quiet town would never pray the same again. No one screamed. No one saw it coming. Only a silence so heavy, it seemed to hold its breath, waiting for someone to notice what had just begun. This isn't a story about scandal. It's a story about what happens when devotion turns dangerous, and when the line between faith and desire blurs beyond return. Before we uncover what that sound truly meant, make sure you're subscribed, because the truth that followed didn't whisper. It thundered. By every measure, she looked like a success story. Reverend Elaine Porter, 38, married, respected, and adored by her congregation. Her voice carried through the sanctuary like calm water, steady and soothing. People said her prayers could heal grief, that her smile could pull anyone out of despair. But what no one saw was how heavy that smile had become. Behind the robes, Elaine lived in a quiet storm. Every sermon was a performance, every Sunday a mask. She preached about faith and discipline while quietly drowning in exhaustion. Her marriage, once the heartbeat of her ministry, had cooled into a kind of professional partnership. She and her husband, Pastor Daniel Porter, shared a home but not a life. They shared a mission but not a heartbeat. The church had grown fast, too fast. With growth came new systems, new media, and new faces. Among them was Marcus Hale, a 34-year-old media volunteer with charm that seemed effortless. He was the man behind the camera, the one who made Elaine's sermons look perfect online. The congregation saw him as talented, devoted, humble. Elaine saw him as useful. Then, over time, she saw something else. Late nights editing footage became private conversations. Shared prayers became shared silences. And in those silences, something dangerous began to breathe. Elaine told herself it wasn't wrong. She told herself it was mentorship, emotional support, ministry work. But temptation doesn't announce itself, it disguises itself as purpose. There's a reason secrets grow best in sacred spaces, they know the walls will protect them. By spring, the two were inseparable during church events. She trusted him with passwords, sermon drafts, even her private notes. No one questioned it. Why would they? She was their pastor. But every secret has a weight. And when you carry it into the pulpit, it follows you home. That vibration in the dark, the one that started it all, was still months away. But everything that would lead to it had already begun. Every look. Every late-night text. Every little lie told to keep the peace. The seeds of what was coming weren't planted in lust. They were planted in loneliness. And loneliness, when left unchecked, becomes a weapon, one that eventually turns on the person who's holding it. On Sundays, she seemed untouchable. Reverend Elaine Porter, flawless smile, perfect tone, every word landing like scripture. The congregation watched her with reverence, never guessing that beneath the satin calm, her heart was slipping offbeat. Each morning, she rehearsed serenity in the mirror, fixing her collar until it looked like control. By the time she reached the pulpit, her mask fit perfectly. And yet, when she spoke of purity and purpose, a quiet tremor lived beneath the words. Marcus Hale stood behind the camera, steady, focused, unblinking. His lens followed her like prayer. Every Sunday, he framed her face in light, every sermon a portrait of grace and temptation. After service, they stayed behind, reviewing footage in the half-dark. The scent of polished wood lingered. The only sound was the low hum of equipment cooling down. He praised her presence, her power on screen. She said it was just ministry. But even the air between them had started to change. What began as gratitude became dependency, and dependency became silence, the kind that hums just before something breaks. They hid in plain sight. No whispers, no glances, no reason to suspect. The disguise was perfect because it was holy. But behind every perfect image is a flaw waiting for focus. And while Elaine tried to polish her guilt into grace, Marcus was already learning how to hold power, with passwords, with footage, with secrets. Perfection doesn't shatter when the world is watching. It shatters when you start believing it will last. And somewhere in the background, a lens was already waiting for its cue. It started quietly, so quietly, it could have passed for routine. A small request here. A harmless suggestion there. But something in Marcus's voice had changed. He no longer asked how she wanted things done, he told her. The light needed to be warmer, the angle tighter, the camera closer. Each adjustment sounded professional, but each one took a little more of her space. Elaine brushed it off at first. He was ambitious, talented, a perfectionist like her. But ambition can hide hunger, and perfection often masks control. Soon, Marcus was arriving early, lingering long after everyone had gone. He stayed in the sound booth alone, replaying her sermons. She'd hear faint echoes of her own voice drifting through the walls, phrases she didn't remember saying. It felt wrong, intimate in ways she couldn't name. One night, she walked into her office and found him behind her desk. He was scrolling through her personal sermon drafts, notes she'd never shared. He smiled when she froze. "Just backing them up," he said. The words were easy, but the look in his eyes wasn't. That night, the church didn't feel like hers anymore. The air was thick, humming with a kind of silence that only fear creates. Even her reflection in the stained glass windows looked like someone hiding something. She changed passwords. Locked doors. Moved with caution through the halls she'd once called holy. Yet no matter how careful she became, she could feel the camera somewhere, always waiting, always watching. Fear became prayer. Prayer became silence. And silence became surrender. By the time she understood what Marcus was truly keeping, it was too late. Because the camera wasn't pointed at the pulpit anymore. It was pointed at her. It was late, too late for anyone to still be in the church. The halls were silent, the air cold enough to make breath visible. Elaine's heels echoed softly against the tiles as she walked toward her office, the darkness folding around her like judgment. She'd only come back for a forgotten notebook, nothing more. But as she neared the media room, a faint hum drifted through the door. Low. Electrical. Unsettling. A sliver of blue light leaked into the hallway, pulsing like a heartbeat. She pushed the door open. The monitors were alive. Every screen flickered with footage, sermons, prayer meetings, choir rehearsals. Ordinary church life, yet something about it felt wrong. Each frame lingered too long on her face. Each pan followed her movements even when she wasn't speaking. Elaine stepped closer, breath tightening. A folder sat open on the desktop, labeled only with her initials. She clicked. Her voice filled the room, soft, nervous, private. She wasn't preaching. She wasn't praying. She was talking. To Marcus. Words she didn't remember him recording. She clicked again. Another file. Then another. Her reflection in the monitors turned pale under the screen's glow as she watched herself, alone in her office, reading notes, adjusting her robe after service. Moments no one should have seen. Every breath, every glance, every hesitation, captured. Archived. Owned. Then, in one frame, Marcus appeared. He adjusted the camera, smiled directly into the lens, calm, deliberate. A smile that said, "I know you'll find this one day." Her pulse slammed against her ribs. The room felt smaller, the light harsher. She reached behind the desk, yanked the plug from the wall. The monitors went black, but the silence was worse, it felt like the whole building was listening. She stood there, trembling. Betrayed not by love, but by evidence. He hadn't just stolen her privacy, he had stolen her image, her ministry, her truth. Clutching the hard drive, she backed out of the room. The sanctuary lights flickered once, then dimmed again, as if even the church itself couldn't bear to watch. Outside, the air hit her like glass, cold, thin, merciless. She thought the danger was over. That she had stopped it. But the storm had already begun, not in the heavens, but in the circuits that never forget. Morning light poured through the stained glass windows, painting the sanctuary in fractured reds and golds. From the pulpit, it looked peaceful, almost divine, but to Elaine, it felt like judgment. Every color seemed to burn against her skin. She hadn't slept. The hard drive sat in her handbag like a live wire. Every time she blinked, she saw his face on that screen, his smirk, his calm, his ownership. This wasn't going to be a confession. It was going to be a reckoning. Marcus walked in late, the way men do when they think time belongs to them. Coffee in hand, headphones dangling, that same unbothered grin. Elaine waited until the others were gone. Then she called his name. He turned, casual. "Morning, Pastor." Her title rolled off his tongue like mockery. She placed the drive on the desk between them. The small thud seemed to echo across the empty room. "I found it," she said. He looked down, then up again, the grin not leaving his face. "You shouldn't be going through church files." "They're not church files," she whispered. "They're me." He shrugged, leaning closer. "I recorded us. You didn't complain before." Her breath caught. "You had no right." "I have every right," he said softly. "You were willing. Don't act holy now." Her pulse spiked. Something inside her, the same part that preached forgiveness every Sunday, snapped. "You used me," she said. "You recorded me like proof," he cut in. "In case you ever tried to make me disappear." A long, electric silence. The hum of the lights. The soft ticking of a wall clock. He reached for the drive. She reached faster. A hand on her wrist. A shove. Her shoulder hit the desk, sending papers into the air like feathers. The hard drive spun across the tiles. "Stop," she cried, but he was already closing the space between them. She pushed back. Harder than she meant to. A stumble. A crash. The sound rang through the sanctuary, a dull, final note under the glass light. Then silence. No movement. No breath. The hard drive blinked once, a faint blue pulse on the floor. Elaine's heart hammered so loudly it drowned everything else. She waited for him to get up. He didn't. For a moment, there was nothing, only dust drifting through the colored light. And then she heard it. A low hum. Familiar. Relentless. She turned toward the corner and saw it. The red light. Still on. Still recording. For a long moment, there was nothing. No movement. No sound. Only the thin, trembling rhythm of her own breath. Elaine stood frozen in the half-light, her mind refusing to believe what her eyes already knew. The colors from the stained glass windows bled across the floor, red, gold, violet, no longer holy, just cruel reminders of where she stood. Marcus lay still. One arm pinned beneath him, his head turned at an impossible angle. The coffee he brought that morning had spilled across the tiles, creeping toward her shoes in a slow brown trail that looked like blood. "Marcus?" Her voice cracked. "Nothing." She knelt beside him, fingers searching for a pulse. Her hands trembled so badly she could barely touch him. Nothing. No warmth. No heartbeat. "No, no, no, no," she whispered. This can't be real." She pressed her palms against her face. The skin of her hands smelled of sweat, dust, and something metallic. Her fingerprints were everywhere, on the desk, the door, the floor, his shirt. She felt them like evidence burning into her skin. The red light still glowed in the corner, silent and merciless. Watching. Recording. It caught everything, her shaking, her crying, her ruin. Her thoughts scattered, the police. The congregation. Daniel. Every sermon she'd ever preached about grace came back to mock her. How do you beg forgiveness when you can't forgive yourself? A faint buzz filled the silence, the old fluorescent light humming above her, steady, indifferent. Outside, a church bell rang. 9 times. She stood slowly, her legs unsteady, eyes on the camera. The lens was still fixed on her like an eye that refused to blink. She reached for her phone, every movement heavy, deliberate. 9. 1. 1. Her voice broke as she spoke. There's been an accident. The call ended. The silence deepened. She didn't pray. She didn't cry. She just stood there, waiting for the sound of footsteps, sirens, salvation, anything. Through the window, the morning light sharpened, bleaching the sanctuary in harsh white. It illuminated everything, the overturned desk, the spilled coffee, the body that no longer moved. And in that glare, the red light blinked once more, then faded to black. But darkness doesn't erase truth. It only hides it, until someone presses play. The first responders arrived to a room heavy with silence. The kind that follows something irreversible. Paramedics moved fast, then slowed, then stopped. Their radios crackled softly against the echo of footsteps. The air smelled faintly of disinfectant and old wood polish. Beneath the stained glass, the morning light fractured into shards of color that danced across the body on the floor. Detectives followed, notebooks out, voices low. They didn't shout or accuse, they observed. Every corner of the room seemed to speak. The desk overturned. The dresser edge with a faint smear. A bent paper clip still clung to the wood where someone had grabbed for balance. Nothing about the scene screamed chaos. It whispered struggle. Evidence text moved methodically, flash, measure, mark, move on. Gloves snapped. Cameras clicked. The hard drive was found near the pulpit, its light dead but its memory intact. The camera in the corner was still recording when they arrived. One detective crouched down, whispering, "Got it." The clock on its screen read 8:47 a.m., the exact moment the church bell outside had tolled 9 times. In the media room, the picture deepened. Rows of footage, carefully labeled folders, told a story Elaine hadn't confessed to but the files already knew. Sermons. Rehearsals. Private rooms. The dates matched the hours no one else was present. Every folder bore her initials. Every password, his pattern. Fingerprints overlapped, his and hers, on everything. Keycard data placed them alone for 47 minutes. The camera's metadata filled in the rest. For investigators, this wasn't mystery. It was reconstruction. By afternoon, the sanctuary wasn't a church anymore. It was evidence. And in that silence, surrounded by proof, one detective murmured the truth no one wanted to say. The camera saw it all. Even the things she can't remember. At the precinct, the air was different, dry, sterile, humming under fluorescent light. Elaine sat across from 2 detectives and a recorder that blinked red every few seconds, marking time like a heartbeat. She looked smaller now. Not a pastor. Not a leader. Just a woman holding a paper cup she never drank from. Her hands trembled around it, but her eyes stayed steady. Somewhere between shock and surrender. She spoke in fragments. An argument. A shove. A fall. "I called right after," she said. "I didn't mean." The sentence broke. The lead detective nodded but didn't answer. He'd heard versions of this before. Still, there was something different about this one, the setting, the silence, the faith woven through it. Her words were logged, transcribed, time-stamped. Outside the interview room, analysts reviewed the footage. The autofocus spike. The blur of two figures. The sound of a breath caught mid-scream. Then, stillness. The camera didn't catch rage. It caught fear. But the law doesn't measure fear, it measures force. When confronted with the recovered files, the ones from months earlier, Elaine's composure cracked. Her eyes filled but no tears fell. She admitted the affair, the manipulation, the guilt. She didn't defend the push. She didn't blame the victim. She just whispered, he wouldn't stop. Intent became the question, and the question had no simple answer. Was it fear? Was it fury? Was it both? Prosecutors argued over language, reckless, impulsive, provoked, unlawful. Each word carried its own weight, its own sentence. The district attorney chose manslaughter, citing panic and coercion. The evidence was clear, but the motive wasn't. When Elaine finally stood, the chair beneath her made a sound so sharp it startled everyone in the room. She turned once toward the mirrored glass. On the other side, a detective whispered to another, "She knows she's not leaving tonight." And as she was led away, her reflection in the one-way glass stayed behind, lit by the same kind of red light that had watched her from the start. The courthouse breathed its own kind of silence, sterile, cold, and heavy with expectation. Outside, cameras waited like vultures. Inside, everything was polished and still. The air smelled faintly of wood varnish and paper. The floor gleamed as if it too had been scrubbed of sin. Elaine entered quietly, flanked by guards. The gray suit hung on her frame like borrowed dignity. No collar, no robe, no ring, just the echo of who she used to be. Her eyes stayed low, her steps deliberate. The trial began with light. A projection flickered onto the courtroom wall, the footage recovered from the sanctuary. Two blurred figures. A quick motion. A fall. No words. No screams. Just the sound of breath, then stillness. The prosecutor spoke softly, his voice steady and cruel in its calm. "This wasn't a moment of madness," he said. "It was a moment of choice." She could have walked away. Instead, she pushed. He moved to motive, exposure, shame, fear of losing everything. She wasn't just protecting her image, he added. She was protecting the lie she built inside that church. Then came the files, played on the same screen that once held her sermons. Footage of her alone, unaware, framed by a lens that never blinked. Each clip, another trespass. Each one, a wound the court could see but never feel. Her defense attorney rose slowly. He didn't raise his voice. He spoke like a man eulogizing the living. "This is not premeditation," he said. "This is panic. A woman cornered by control, filmed without consent, blackmailed by fear." He pointed to the evidence table. "The same camera that captured a death," he said, "also captured her captivity." Elaine took the stand on the third day. The jurors leaned forward as she spoke. Her words trembled but did not break. "I was scared," she said. "He told me if I left, he'd show everything. I wasn't thinking, I just wanted him to stop." The prosecutor paused, then stepped closer. His tone sharpened. "When you pushed him, Reverend Porter," he asked, "were you trying to stop the recording, or rewrite what it showed?" Elaine closed her eyes. "I just wanted silence," she whispered. The courtroom fell still. Even the judge looked down. By week's end, the evidence was complete. The jury would decide whether silence was a defense, or a confession. The day of judgment dawned gray and windless. Outside, reporters gathered again, microphones aimed like weapons at the courthouse steps. Inside, the pews were full, parishioners, journalists, strangers, all waiting to see how mercy would sound when spoken by law. Elaine stood as the jury entered. The rustle of paper, the scrape of chairs, the whisper of fabric, it all blurred into a hum. Time slowed, like it had inside the church that morning. The clerk's voice trembled once before finding its strength. Guilty of manslaughter in the first degree. The word guilty seemed to echo off the walls, roll across the marble, and settle in her chest like a weight she'd been carrying all along. Her husband sat in the back, hands folded, eyes red but dry. When she looked his way, he didn't turn. He simply nodded, once, slow, deliberate. It wasn't forgiveness. It was acknowledgement. The judge spoke next. He talked about grace, responsibility, and the betrayal of sacred trust. He said her actions blurred the line between victim and offender, faith and fear. Then he pronounced the sentence, 10 years, parole eligible in 6. Elaine didn't cry. She didn't protest. She just closed her eyes as the gavel struck, 3 hollow knocks that sounded almost like prayer. As bailiffs led her toward the exit, the murmurs rose behind her. The crowd divided into 2 camps, those who called it justice, and those who whispered mercy. Neither word felt right. Outside, the wind picked up. Church bells rang somewhere far away, muffled by distance, but clear enough for her to count the chimes. When she reached the transport van, she looked up one last time. The sun had burned through the clouds, washing the courthouse steps in pale light. No colors. No glass. No holiness, just the truth, bare and unfiltered. Because even when the red light dies, the story doesn't. It survives in headlines, in hard drives, in the quiet archives of memory. And somewhere in those recordings, her voice still asks the same question. Not to the jury, not to God, but to anyone still listening. When does forgiveness begin? Prison didn't feel like punishment at first. It felt like absence, of sound, of light, of meaning. No bells. No hymns. Just the endless buzz of fluorescent lights that hummed like penance. Elaine Porter was now inmate 47291. Her robe had become a number. Her voice, once broadcast to thousands, was now recorded only for intake. The gray uniform scratched against her skin, rough and impersonal. The air smelled of bleach, iron, and something faintly sour, like memory trying to fade. The days began at 5:30. Metal doors clanged open, trays slid down rails, boots echoed on concrete. Each sound became part of her new liturgy, cold, repetitive, ritual without redemption. At first, she tried to pray. The words caught in her throat. Guilt doesn't pray, it replays. The push, the sound, the fall. Over and over, like static she couldn't shut off. Other inmates watched her with curiosity. The pastor from the news. Some approached with questions about faith. Others mocked. One night, a woman folded a shirt in the laundry line beside her and said softly, "You still talk to him?" Elaine paused. "Not yet." The woman nodded. "He'll wait." Sometimes mercy sounded like silence. She wrote letters she never sent, to her husband, to Marcus's parents, to the church that no longer existed. Each one started the same way, "I don't know why I'm writing this." Months blurred into seasons. The walls didn't change, but she did. Her pride eroded quietly, replaced by something raw and smaller, honesty without language. Every night, before lights out, she'd look at the security camera above her bed. A red dot blinked there, steady, unblinking. "You're still watching, aren't you?" she whispered. Part of her hoped someone, or something, still was. And in that glow, the hum of electricity became prayer again. Not words. Just endurance. Years passed. The world outside moved on, but her name didn't. It floated through documentaries, podcasts, debates. They called her the pastor who fell. Every retelling chose a villain, a victim, a lesson. None of them matched the truth she carried in silence. Elaine was released after 6 years. The gates opened without ceremony. The wind outside smelled of rain and exhaust, a strange kind of freedom. Her husband didn't come. The church had been sold. The sanctuary was now a community hall. The pulpit where she once preached had become a folding table for bingo nights. She found quiet work in a university library, cataloging digital archives. Rows of old computers blinked softly in the dark. Each hum felt familiar. Every time a red indicator light flickered, she froze, then forced herself to keep typing. Reporters kept asking for interviews. She declined them all. But one evening, she mailed a handwritten note to a journalist who'd covered her trial. "You were right. Cameras don't lie. But they don't tell the truth either. Truth needs a heart to hold it. And mine failed. No signature. Just the initial E." Months later, a janitor found an old sermon draft tucked in her desk drawer. It was titled, "Forgiveness and the Unseen." The final line read, "Some lights record. Others reveal. The hardest truth to face is the one that does both." No one knows if she ever returned to a church. Some say she spent her final years visiting women in halfway houses, never speaking of her past. But if you enter that library late at night, the red light above the archive room still glows faintly. The system it once belonged to was shut down years ago. Maybe it's a glitch. Maybe it's memory. Or maybe it's what remains when guilt finally stops begging to be erased. Because some stories outlive their witnesses. They keep recording, quietly, patiently, until someone learns to forgive what the world refuses to forget. It wasn't the fall that ended two lives. It was the silence that built the altar for it. Elaine Porter's story reminds us that truth doesn't always arrive as confession. Sometimes, it arrives as evidence, cold, unblinking, recorded. Every secret believes it will die unseen. But something always remembers. The camera never blinked. The church never spoke. Yet silence told the story the world refused to hear. Faith can fail. Love can curdle. And guilt, when left too long, learns to breathe on its own. Forgiveness isn't a miracle that falls from the sky. It's a choice made in darkness, when no one's watching. The quiet decision to keep living after your own faith abandons you. And even when the lights go out, the story doesn't end. Somewhere, in the circuits of memory, the red light still glows. Not to accuse. Not to judge. But to remember. Because stories like hers never really fade. They wait, in silence, for someone brave enough to listen. If this story made you pause, don't let it end here. Subscribe for more true stories that explore the fragile line between faith and fear, guilt and grace. And tell us what you think below. Does everyone deserve a second chance? And if so, when does forgiveness truly begin?